You are a German general. You have conquered Poland in weeks. You have taken France in a month, while your armies have marched thousands of miles across the Russian steppe. You are looking at a tactical map of Stalingrad. There is a red circle around a single building near the river. Your intelligence officers have labeled it a Festung, a fortress. Your tanks have fired at it. Your artillery has pounded it. Your infantry has launched wave after wave of assaults against it. But for 58 days, you cannot take this one building. Here is the shocking truth. It was not a fortress. It was not a bunker. It was a 4-story apartment building, a residential co-op. And inside, there was not a battalion. There were just 25 men. 25 men who were cut off, starving and sleep-deprived. But they had an order, not one step back. This is the story of Sergeant Yakov Pavlov and the deadliest apartment complex in history. The date is late September 1942. The place is Stalingrad. By this point in the war, the German 6th Army had pushed the Soviet defenders all the way back to the Volga River. The Soviets were clinging to a strip of land, sometimes only a few hundred yards wide. If they lost the river, they lost the city. If they lost the city, they likely lost the war. In the center of this chaos stood 9th January Square. It was a critical tactical position. If the Germans controlled the square, they could fire directly onto the Volga supply crossings. Overlooking this square was a 4-story apartment block. On the maps, it was just Building 6/1. The Soviet commanders needed eyes on that square. They sent a reconnaissance team to seize the building. The team was led by a junior sergeant, 24-year-old Yakov Pavlov. He started with just 3 other soldiers. They crept through the rubble, entered the building, and cleared it room by room, floor by floor. They found a handful of terrified civilians in the basement and German machine gunners on the upper floors. After a brutal close quarters firefight, Pavlov and his men took the building. They radioed back to headquarters. The reply was simple: hold it. They did not know it yet, but they had just signed up for a 2-month siege. Building 6/1 was about to become Pavlov's house. How do 25 men hold a generic apartment building against a German armored division? The answer lies in brutal, ingenious tactics. Pavlov and the reinforcements that eventually joined him, led by Lieutenant Ivan Afanasiev, turned the building into a customized kill zone. First, they understood the geometry of the battlefield. The building had a clear line of sight for 1 kilometer to the north, south, and west. They set up a layered defense that was a nightmare for German tankers. They placed their anti-tank weapons on the 3rd floor. The Soviets were using the PTRD-41, a beast of a weapon. It is a single-shot anti-tank rifle, 6 feet long, firing a massive 14.5 millimeter armor-piercing round. It kicks like a mule. German tanks, the Panzers, had thick armor on the front, but thin armor on the top of their turrets. By shooting from the 3rd floor, Pavlov's men could fire down onto the roofs of the tanks. When a German tank approached the square, the riflemen on the roof would disable it. Once the tank stopped, the machine gunners in the basement and 1st floor windows would slaughter the infantry trying to bail out. Pavlov also created what tactical analysts call a fire sack. The defenders did not barricade the building completely. They left certain approaches open. They wanted the Germans to come a specific way, but those open paths were sighted by machine guns and mined with explosives. The Germans would see an opening, run for it, and disappear in a cloud of pink mist. Pavlov reportedly told his men, We do not need to hunt them. We just need to wait for them to knock. The tactical setup was brilliant, but the physical endurance required to man, it was inhuman. For 58 days, the defenders lived in a state of constant, deafening violence. The smell of cordite and unwashed bodies. The dust from pulverized brick clogging your lungs. The sound of Stuka dive bombers screaming overhead every few hours. The Germans knew they were there. They shelled the building until 3 of the 4 walls had collapsed. The roof was gone. The floors were sagging, but the basement held. Sleep was a luxury. The men slept in short shifts, weapon in hand. Water was scarce. Food was worse. Their only lifeline was a shallow communication trench dug from the back of the building down to the river. At night, runners would sprint through the trench under mortar fire to bring back ammunition and black bread. But here is the most fascinating part of the psychology, the brotherhood. The garrison of Pavlov's house was a microcosm of the Soviet Union. Among the 25 or so defenders, there were Russians, Ukrainians, Georgians, Uzbeks, Kazakhs, and Tatars. They did not share a common culture. Some barely spoke Russian. But in that basement, they forged an unbreakable bond. They engaged in psychological warfare against the Germans. When the Germans blasted propaganda music or called on them to surrender via loudspeakers, the defenders would respond by firing a synchronized volley of mortar shells or singing traditional folk songs at the top of their lungs. They refused to be terrified. They refused to be quiet. During lulls in the fighting, the defenders would patch up their uniforms. Why? Because they wanted the Germans to see them looking disciplined through their binoculars. They wanted the enemy to know, we are not animals hiding in a hole. We are soldiers, and we are waiting for you. The German obsession with this house defies logic. On German military maps, the building was marked as a fortress. The commander of the German Sixth Army, General Paulus, could not understand why his tanks could not push through 9th January Square. General Vasily Chuikov, the commander of the Soviet defense in Stalingrad, later made a famous comparison. He said the Germans lost more men trying to take Pavlov's house than they did taking Paris. The sentiment captures the brutal reality. The Germans lost entire companies assaulting this one ruin. The problem for the Germans was the range. Their tanks could not get close enough. If a Panzer got within 100 meters, it could not elevate its main gun high enough to hit the anti-tank riflemen on the 3rd floor. But if they stayed back, they could not support their infantry. So the Germans resorted to air power. They bombed the building into a skeleton. By November, the house was just a pile of bricks with a basement. But every time the German infantry moved in to check if the defenders were dead, a machine gun would open up from a cellar window. The pile of German bodies outside the building grew so high that the defenders had to sneak out at night to push them over so they would not block their fields of fire. The dead were literally becoming a barricade. The siege of Pavlov's house finally ended in late November 1942, when the Soviet counter-offensive Operation Uranus relieved the defenders. When the relief forces arrived, they found the garrison unshaven, covered in brick dust, and barely standing. But the Germans had never entered the building. This defense changed military doctrine. It proved that in urban warfare, a small, motivated infantry unit inside a hardened structure is superior to armor. Tanks are kings of the open field, but in the city, they are just big metal coffins. Strategically, Pavlov's house became a symbol. It was proof that the German war machine could be stopped. It was the physical embodiment of not one step back. After the war, the city of Stalingrad, now Volgograd, was rebuilt, but they did not tear down Pavlov's house. They rebuilt it as an apartment building, but they left a section of the original bullet-riddled red brick wall as a memorial. If you go there today, you can see it. A modern city has grown around it, but that scar remains. Sergeant Yakov Pavlov survived the war. He became a hero of the Soviet Union. He joined the Communist Party and lived a quiet life, passing away in 1981. But he never claimed the credit solely for himself. He always spoke of his men, the multi-ethnic brotherhood that held the line. The story of Pavlov's house is not really about tactics or weapons. It is about the human capacity to endure. There is an old saying about the Battle of Stalingrad: stone breaks, iron melts, but men do not. For 58 days, the stone of the building crumbled. The iron of the German tanks melted, but the men in the basement did not break. This is the story of Pavlov's house. 25 men, 58 days, one building that changed the course of a war.